So hello and welcome to the latest series of the Connect Search vodcast series, where we talk to a number of executives. We've spoken to individuals about their specialist function. Today, we're talking about global mobility and the impact of working internationally. As you're probably familiar, our business specializes in global executive search, and we often have individuals relocate within country or internationally to take up their new assignment. Today, I'm talking to Nina Sichtermann. Nina, hello.
Good morning, or hello, better said.
Indeed. Nice to see you again. Nina is or has spent 12 years with LIDL, undertaken a number of international assignments with the group, and most recently was Senior Vice President of Operations for their US business. Nina, this is a passion of mine too, because I've also worked internationally in South Africa and in Australia, and I'm aware of some of the challenges. Some are more obvious than others. I'm really keen to get your insights. Now, you grew up in Germany.
Yes.
What made you want to work internationally?
Yes, good question. There's two things to it, I would say. There's a personal drive, and then there is a professional drive, obviously, as well to it. I start with the personal one, and this is, you've mentioned before, I grew up in Germany, and it's not only that I grew up in Germany, I actually grew up on a very small farm in a very small village. So to have that urge, that desire to go out and explore the world was something strange, if to say so. However, it was there. And I always felt that there's more to the world, or there's more to see, that you have to see and you have to explore. So
were you inspired, Nina? Sorry to interject. Were you inspired by friends and by people around you who would undertake similar ventures? No.
Not at all. It was just something that was there, and I can't explain where it came from. But I always thought, and I still think, obviously, that there is more to the world and more to life that you can see and that's around you. And if you have the chance, you should go and take it and live and explore whatever you can. Mm-hmm. So I did. I started with my studies, and I actually focused my studies already in a way that they were fairly international. So they took me around to Australia, they took me to England, and they took me to Spain. And I started my first place in Germany, my first professional job in Germany. However, and this is now the professional side of the urge or the drive that keeps me going, it is truly challenging, and it's also truly enriching to move around and to experience different markets, different countries, different mentalities. And even though you think, and you know that I've been working in the retail industry for most of my life, especially food retail, even if you think it's a simple business, it must be very similar wherever you go because people have the same needs. It is in some ways, and there's so many nuances to it, and there's so many differences to it that you can only explore that, and you can only know that once you're actually in there and up against it. And that gives you a big drive professionally as well. It prepares you for whatever comes next, and it makes you a better professional in the end.
Yeah, and I want to explore that a little bit more. You touched on a couple of topics there, so we'll drill down into those, because I think the perception against the reality is quite different on occasion. It can seem very exciting as you were growing up, wanting to leave the village, the region that you were in, and explore the wider world. I think a lot of people have that interest, but it's about actually, what is it really like? And that's what I want to get to understand. So you spoke about your studies in Spain, the UK, and in Australia as well. And I know professionally you've worked in Germany, you've worked in Spain, you've worked in the UK, now in the US. So 2 continents, 4 countries. What would you say are the biggest challenges when relocating internationally?
Yes. There's the obvious ones. There's the ones where you move somewhere else, you don't know anyone, you don't know your co-workers, you don't necessarily know your colleagues either. It's all new, even though you're moving around within the same company or with the same industry. So obviously you're in a new setup. But then the really big ones are the ones where you lose your frame of reference. And I'm intentionally not saying biases, because bias is such a negatively connotated word. But if you have been in a country for a longer time, however long that is, you are bound to have a certain structure of how you approach things, how you evaluate people, how you judge on certain outcomes. And if you move to a different country that you've never been to before, that you've never really worked and lived in before, that frame of reference goes away. Sometimes completely, sometimes not completely, but you have to rebuild your frame of reference, and you have to observe and listen a lot to everyone around you to figure out what's actually right and what's wrong, and what's good and bad, and what do I have to do to make good decisions and to make a success and to deliver results, which is ultimately what we're here for, what I'm there for.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you touch on, and consciously didn't use the word bias, but and I understand why, because as you say, it has a number of negative connotations. But in terms of your roles have been leadership roles. So you've gone in to lead teams, to lead operations. How do you get buy-in from local employees when you're entering the market for the first time?
Yes, good question. And I've thought about it for a long time. There is a few aspects to it, and that it also depends very much on the country that you move to. But the most basic one is, don't just walk in and think you know it, or think you know how things work, even if you've been highly successful in your past role or in your past country, or you have a number of good results that you can build your next steps on. Just go in, observe, and listen, at least for a bit. Because as I said before, you need to figure out whether whatever you've seen and experienced in the past is valuable, to agree that you can use it in the country that you are at the same time, at the time where you have to start again. And that capacity, or the willingness to just listen and to speak to people on even on a non-professional level, just to see what they are like, how they are, what their day was like, builds up a lot of trust and gets you closer to the ones you work with and the ones you have to know as well. So, short answer to that question, forget about your role for a bit, your professional role, obviously not totally, but be more the person that you are, and explore the people that come across in your professional setup. And then start making your evaluations, take your decisions, ask questions, and make your first steps and moves.
Mm-hmm. So really show your human side, that dare totally. I say it, softer side of everybody's personality as you entered. You found that's been successful for you.
Totally. And it's even taken me to a part where I mentioned before, I started in Germany for obvious reasons. I never liked to drink coffee. My first role was in a company that was had a very clear decision structure. It was very hierarchical, and it was very clear who would do which task and who would not do which task, which would also mean who would engage with who and who would not engage with who. So I move on to the next country, which in that case was Spain. And I didn't have a clue. I had never been in Spain before, other than some holidays and some months abroad while I was studying. And I didn't really speak the language either. So there was me coming from that very, very German approach, very distant approach as well, very professional approach to things, moving to a country that I didn't know how it worked, and I didn't even speak properly to find out how things were going on. So I had to find a way to somehow engage with people. I was the odd piece, completely odd. I was looking differently. I was speaking strangely. I was coming from a different country that was supposed to be in some ways, stronger as well, financially stronger, economically stronger. So all these things, you carry those things with you when you move on. So that was me for trying to find out what to do. And I figured out very quickly that in Spain, it's very typical that in the morning, in between 10 or 11, people have a coffee break. It can be a bad coffee, it can be a good coffee, but this coffee break, 10 minutes, is a very, very sad thing. And it's a very social thing. So I didn't like coffee. I wasn't used to just jumping down all the hierarchies and just having small talk. But I ended up doing it. It was so rewarding, and it helped me so much to actually move on professionally and have my team and those days behind me. That was a big eye-opener for me.
Yeah, and I guess it's being open to those small behavioral changes that allows you to get close, to understand the people and be embraced by them and given the opportunity to succeed.
Totally. Yes. It is the small things. It sounds so common and it sounds so easy, but it is really, really small things. It's the normal day-to-day stuff that brings you closer to who you have to be close with.
Yes. And I must ask, on the linguistic side, were you given a crash course in Spanish or did you have a translator?
No, I was giving a crash course. Right. Very good. A lot of hours, 1-on-1 hours. But it is so different to find yourself in a store in Spain where no one else speaks English or German or any other language, and having to engage with customers, with staff, with everyone who just comes across. I was totally overloaded.
Mm-hmm. But you got there, Nina.
Very unique experience.
In terms of the respective markets you've worked in, and they've all got nuances, they've all got the differences, some we'll be aware of. But what actions do you take to ensure that you understand local market conditions, whether that be working with suppliers or the preferences in products amongst the regions within the different countries you've worked in? How do you make sure that you understand those local conditions?
Yes, you start with zero, even if you've done your research before you actually came into a new country. So when I ended up starting again in the US, the first thing I did, I traveled the country. And I don't want to say the whole country. I traveled the East Coast and all those states where we are operating in. I took the car. I didn't just take a plane, or I didn't take a train or anything that would have taken me away from or further away from the real life. I was driving hours and hours, and I was stopping in our stores at that time, obviously, and I was also stopping in a lot of competitor stores. And also retailers that were not retailing food, but just to see what are people like here? Where do they shop? How do they shop? Is there strange things from my point of view that are very normal here? What are their leaflets like? Do they use paper leaflets, or do they just look everything up on their phones? Or see what is this country like, and what is the retail environment like.
And that sounds like a shopaholic's dream, but in terms of obviously its mission, was that your choice, or was that you and the business agreed that would be the right strategy to initiate you into the country?
Obviously, that was an agreement. It was my choice as well, and it was specifically my choice to take the car and drive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in terms of the other markets you've worked in, and the US obviously is a great example, because we know that the culture east to west, north to south, and in the respective different states, the food types, the demographic is vast. Yes. So for you to understand that clearly was very important, particularly where the business was present along the East Coast. But in terms of your arrival in Spain and the UK, were there either similar or different actions you took to understand those markets?
Well, Spain, as I said before, was a very basic approach. I just had to make sure that I survive in some way, and really from a linguistic point start finding out what is going on around me. I was just in Spain. I didn't take the car. I didn't drive anywhere. I literally, when I was off, I walked around and tried to gather what is the local market like. What do people do? What are, this sounds really strange, but what are Spanish like? Because as a European, especially as a German, you have that typical Spanish idea. You know, there's loads of people going on holidays to Spain. So you have that image, which is very far away from reality. And I was just curious to find out where are we in between. In England, similar approach to the US, but a lot more condensed. And I also knew England before I started to work and live there. So it was probably the easiest approach for me, the easiest way to find out about a country. In England, for me, it was really, really about working very closely with my teams. And also, honestly, I took a few things that I learned from Spain over to England, which at that point, again, might have seemed very strange, but we had, instead of just having a meeting with my team over a telephone conference, we would just meet in a store, have some lunch and talk topics of the weeks, just to make sure that we were all a little closer to each other, and especially me being closer to them. So I had some learnings that I could carry on from one country to the next, and actually worked out really well.
And I think that's crucial, actually, taking that experience with you, those small learnings, as you say, that means so much. You mentioned in your opening sentence, I think it was, the how beneficial it is having international experience.
Yes.
What are those advantages?
Well, let me say first, it is truly not for everyone, because now it sounds all really roomy and gloomy and doomy. It is always very hard, because you're leaving behind family, you're leaving behind friends, you're leaving, as I said, your whole frame of reference. But it is also very rewarding. And for me, I had to build my safety net, if to say so. So for me, it's always, if I'm going on this endeavor now, if anything goes completely wrong, I can always go back to where I've started if I wanted to. And that made me calm mentally, and made me calm even more so now that I'm carrying along a whole family, which is a whole different game and a whole different story to do.
As you say, that's probably one for another podcast, about raising a family in a different, starting a family in a different country.
I'm just trying to make sure they're used to it already, so they grow up into it.
Yeah, just to add that into the mix. Obviously, you have personally benefited from the international moves that you've made. What have you done to support your team members to also enjoy that international mobility? How have you supported opportunities for them?
Yes, I was very lucky to be in companies that embraced that mentality wholly, which means it is almost seen as normal to send someone to a different country for personal development. Or if it's not a completely different country, send them to a different part of the country or different region, which can be equally challenging, can be equally rewarding as well. And that then comes very down to who that person is. So I'm always up for promoting that. I'm always up for bringing my team members into that position if they're ready for it and if they're not completely scared by it. But even if there is someone who might be slightly scared by it, or questioning whether it's a big ask or whether to do it or not, I'm always the one who, because I've lived through it, who lists up all the doubts and lists up all the consequences and the dangers, if to say so, what can go wrong. And also I try to show a clear path of, you know what, if this goes totally wrong, this can be your plan B, or this is what we can do to make you come back, have you back here, or give you a different option. So I'm trying to, just as I did with myself, or as I still do with myself, I'm trying to take the seriousness out of it in a way. I'm trying to limit the risk, or make them see that the risk is sometimes there, but the beneficial part of it are actually a lot bigger. And I'm there all the way along, so I really don't mind answering questions late in the evening or in the morning or spontaneously when something comes up. We can always find a gap to make sure that there is some quietness and some quiet room for a sound decision making.
Yes, and I think lots of executives will remember the moment they made that leap of faith in their career. And if it's an international move, that is usually that moment, because as you say, you lose the safety net and the comforts of home, family, friends, the familiarity. Yeah, no, that's interesting. You also touched on the personal challenges, because you said that, you grew up in a very remote part of Germany, and I can imagine that community, like others in remote parts of the world, they're very close. Everybody knows everybody. They would support them with everything. What have been the biggest personal challenges for you coming away from your home environment?
The biggest ones are always leaving your family behind and your friends. And I'm especially saying family because they are the ones that are always there. In my case, my family is completely in Germany. So I was the one not only leaving the house, but leaving the country, which is hard if you do it for the first time, because you don't know where you're going, you don't know who you find, and you're just on your own, you're just by yourself. That's definitely the biggest challenge. When it comes down to friends, of course, you're leaving your friends behind as well, but you find new friends as well. If you have more friends, I should say, you're not exchanging one for another, but once you've gone through the motions once or a few times, you see that it's really not about excluding one part from your life and choosing a different part, but you find out that you're adding on friends. In my case, I added on family because I happened to find my husband in Spain, and now I have a Spanish family as well. Yes, it's a sum game, but it is a really big challenge at the beginning when you do it for the first time. And you also really, really have to consider that no matter how often you do this, no matter how often you move around, something will always go wrong. It is never going to work out 100%. Maybe you will lose your passport. Maybe it will take forever until you have a bank account. Maybe the first place you live in is awful, or you can't even find a place. So you need to become too resilient to these sorts of challenges, which, again, if you do it for the first time, are those moments where you think, this is it, I'm going back. But you need to live through that to come to the add-on stage.
Yes, to get to that point of self-fulfillment.
Totally, yes.
Yeah. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but really you're talking here about risk and reward. And obviously, yes, there is a risk because we know it just won't go perfectly first time. There will be challenges.
Yes.
But in your opinion, does the reward outweigh the risk?
100%. It totally outweighs the risk. If you're resilient enough, if you have that vision of waiting for the reward, both personally and professionally, because professionally, there might not be a reward straight away either. It might just be a lot harder. It might just be a lot more hours. It might even be comparatively less pay. But you really need to see this as a long-term game. And the reward is 100% there, honestly. There's so many things that I have seen, so many things that I have experienced, good and bad ones, that make me a better professional and make me ultimately, hopefully, a better human as well, because I'm now a lot more patient. I feel a lot more chilled, a lot of issues that could happen because I've seen them in many instances and in many different countries, and I've seen different solutions to different issues, which I can now dig out again if I have to, or build onto if I have to as well.
Yes. And it's interesting because when we move individuals cross country, sometimes, yes, obviously we support their professional move, but actually sometimes we will be involved in that personal side and just sort of coaching through, because those moments of truth do arise. And usually they're within the first few months, because as you say, it's something that's quite daunting, quite intimidating. And it's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to experience this. But actually those that push through, get to the other side, often that reward, as you say, does outweigh the risk.
Totally. But
Yeah.
you need to push through. It's never easy. It gets easier, but there is always this, why am I doing this? Or do I have to do this again? And yes, it is always good at the end.
Yeah, good. Nina, I really appreciate your insights and your views shared. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'll look forward to speaking to you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a big pleasure.
You're welcome. Take care.